Emily Carter was 12 years old when she first understood that a person could leave their family long before the day they carried a suitcase out the door. That evening in Portland, the winter rain fell so softly it did not make noise so much as tap steadily against the dining room window, wrapping the quiet suburban Carter house in a cold film of mist. On the oak table lay a white envelope from a law office, placed beside Daniel's coffee mug. The coffee inside so cold a thin, glossy skin had formed across its surface. Emily remembered that mug clearly, the one printed with the words, "World's Okayest Dad," which she had bought with her saved-up money at a school fair because Daniel had laughed when he saw it in a store and said he was not good enough to deserve a Best Dad mug. When she gave it to him, he had hugged her, kissed the top of her head, and told her he liked it more than any expensive gift. Now that mug sat beside the white envelope, and even though Emily did not yet understand everything inside it, her body understood before her mind did that some things did not belong at a family dinner, and that envelope was one of them. Daniel sat very straight, his hands folded in front of him, his pale blue shirt neatly pressed, his hair combed as if he were preparing to walk into a meeting rather than preparing to cut his wife's and daughter's lives in half. Laura Carter, Emily's mother, sat beside her, both hands resting in her lap, her fingers clasped so tightly they had gone white, her face pale beneath the yellow light, but she did not cry. The stew on the stove was still hot. The wall clock still ticked evenly. A napkin lay crooked beside Emily's elbow because she had opened it, folded it, then opened it again, like a child trying to give her hands something to do while adults spoke in sentences too smooth to hold. Daniel looked down at the envelope, then at Laura, then at Emily with a tenderness placed so carefully that years later she would come to hate that tenderness more than anger itself. Because if he had shouted, if he had slammed his hand against the table, if he had said he loved someone else more, maybe she would have known where to put H.I.M. in her memory. But he did not shout. He spoke in a calm, slightly tired voice, as though he were the one who had endured too much pain and was only trying, tonight, to help the two women in the house understand that he had a right to live, too. He said he had tried for a long time. He said he could not keep living in a house filled with tension. He said he did not want anyone to be hurt. But sometimes adults had to be honest about what they needed before they died slowly inside. He said he needed peace. He said he needed to breathe. Those sentences fell onto the dinner table. Clean, mature-sounding, sad-sounding. Impossible to challenge without making the person who challenged them seem cruel. Laura said nothing. Emily looked at her mother, waiting for her to stand, waiting for her to throw the mug against the wall, waiting for her to ask what gave him the right to say this house had suffocated him when he was the one who had brought cold air into every room. But Laura only sat there, her face bloodless, her jaw tightened just enough for a vein to rise along her neck. Years later, Emily would remember that not crying as one of the images that hurt her most, because at 12 she mistook it for weakness, for her mother not having enough strength to fight back, only to understand later that sometimes people do not cry because if they begin, they will not be able to stop and still keep the child sitting beside them from breaking apart. Daniel said he did not want Emily to think this was her fault. He said it quickly, like a bandage pressed onto a wound before the blade had even been pulled out. But right after that, he said the house had become too heavy, too cold, too hard to live in, and a child only has to hear that once to begin wondering where the blame belongs if not with the person he had already signed papers to leave. Emily looked at the envelope, then asked very softly, "You already signed it?" Daniel was silent for one beat. Laura closed her eyes. That silence answered for them all. She did not understand divorce law, custody, visitation schedules, or division of assets. But she understood that a signature was something people put down after they had already decided. Daniel had decided before she was asked, before Laura was allowed to cry, before dinner had even finished cooling, before the house knew it had been sentenced. He reached across the table as if to touch her, but Emily pulled back before she could think. His face changed only slightly. Just a flicker of pain he left there like evidence that she was hurting him, too. "I know you're angry," he said quietly, "but one day you'll understand how hard I tried." That was the first of many sentences that would follow her because it did not ask for forgiveness. It placed a future debt in front of her. One day she had to understand. One day she had to see his leaving through his eyes. One day, if she was still hurt, it meant she had not grown up enough. The frightening thing was not only that he was leaving. The more frightening thing was that he had already prepared a story in which he had not abandoned anyone at all. He had only saved himself from a place that had made him suffocate. And right there in the dining room, with rain tapping against the glass, Emily had been cast as part of that place. In the months before the night of the white envelope, the Carter house had changed color so slowly that Emily did not know it was the color of departure. Looking back now, she could see each shade clearly, like stains beneath a fresh coat of paint. Daniel began coming home late, first at 6:30 instead of 6:15, then 7, then 8. And then there were nights when he opened the door after Emily had already brushed her teeth and was standing in the hallway in her pajamas, holding a picture book she was too old for but still kept, because it was one Daniel used to read to her. He would smile at her with a tired smile, rub her head and say, "We'll talk tomorrow, Em. Dad's too tired tonight." Tomorrow became a room that never opened. One week, he forgot to pick her up after art class. Emily stood under the school awning, her backpack heavy on her shoulders, watching one parent's car after another arrive and leave, rain speckling the purple canvas shoes she had begged to buy at the beginning of the school year. She tried to believe he was stuck in traffic, tried to believe his phone was dead, tried to believe there was an emergency. When her teacher finally called Laura, her mother rushed over in an unbuttoned coat, her hair still damp from an interrupted shower, her face full of fear and guilt even though she was not the one who had forgot. That night, when Laura asked Daniel why he had not answered his phone, he rubbed the bridge of his nose and exhaled like someone being dragged into an unfair interrogation. "I told you the battery died. What do you want me to do? Turn back time?" Laura said he had promised their daughter. Daniel looked at Emily, his eyes so sad and soft that she hated the fact that she still wanted to run toward him. "You know Dad didn't mean to, right?" he asked. Emily nodded, not because she understood, because a child chosen by her father as a witness to his innocence can easily mistake that feeling of being chosen for love. From then on, whenever Daniel did something small and wrong, he did not apologize by setting responsibility down where it belonged. He called Emily into the gap between himself and Laura, turning her into the mirror that reflected what he wanted to see. That he was still a good father, that Laura was the one making everything heavy. He began sitting on the porch to take phone calls even when it was cold, lowering his voice into something softer than the voice he used inside the house. Some nights Emily would come downstairs for water and see him through the crack in the curtains, standing beneath the porch roof, one hand in his pocket, the other holding the phone, his head slightly bowed, his mouth curved into a faint smile, the kind of smile he no longer used when Laura told a story from work or when Emily showed him a test with a good grade. Laura asked whom he was talking to, and Daniel said Marion was just a friend from the church fundraising group, someone going through a hard time. Laura said a friend did not need to be called at 11 at night in that voice. Daniel set his phone down on the table, very slowly, like a man trying to remain calm in the face of irrationality. "Do you hear yourself, Laura? I can't have one private conversation without you turning it into evidence. I just need to breathe." That phrase began appearing more and more, like a key he used to unlock every door out of responsibility. He needed to breathe, needed space, needed peace. If Laura asked about a restaurant receipt from Beaverton, he needed to breathe. If she asked why his shirt smelled like unfamiliar perfume, he needed space. If she stayed silent through dinner because she was exhausted, he said that very silence was what made the house cold. Once Emily stood at the foot of the stairs, a glass of water in her hand, and heard him talking to Aunt Karen in the garage. "I don't feel respected in my own home anymore. Laura is cold, Karen, cold in a way outsiders can't see, but I feel myself dying every day. Emily is distant from me now, too. I try with her, but Laura put her on her side a long time ago." Emily did not move. The water in her glass touched the rim, growing cold in her hand. She was more distant from her father because he had become distant first, because he had forgotten to pick her up, because he came home late, because he spoke on the porch in a tender voice to someone who was not her mother. But in Daniel's story, that distance became a trait of hers, evidence against the old house. He did not have to invent everything. He only had to take the right piece of truth, cut away the cause, and place it inside a picture where he was the sorrowful man being pushed out. That was what made him frightening. Daniel did not seem evil. He did not sneak around clumsily. He did not shout, slam doors, or call Laura ugly names. He used politeness as armor, a sad voice as a small knife, half-truths as bricks to build another house while the old one still had people living inside. The note in his coat pocket appeared like that, too. Not a long love letter, not an explosive piece of evidence, just a receipt from a restaurant in Beaverton, 2 desserts, and a handwritten line on the back in blue ink. Thank you for listening. Laura stood in the laundry room for a long time with that piece of paper, the dryer turning behind her, the metal buttons clacking steadily. She did not cry, did not throw anything, only folded the paper and slipped it into her own pocket, then continued moving clothes into the dryer with movements so careful they were almost painful. When Daniel was asked about it, he did not confess the way a man caught should confess. He said Marion was a friend, said she was going through something difficult, said she knew how to listen without turning everything into confrontation. I haven't done anything shameful, he said, and when Laura said he had taken another woman to dinner and hidden it from her, he answered that he had not hidden it. He had only avoided this reaction. Emily did not yet know how to name that way of speaking, but she could hear that Daniel's greatest skill was not telling outright lies. It was dragging attention away from his action and placing it on the reaction of the person he had hurt. He was not sneaking around. Laura was suspicious. He was not lying. He had to avoid her reaction. He was not choosing another family. The old house was suffocating him. Even before he left, he had forced Emily and her mother to live inside the draft of his story, where every bit of their pain had already been prepared to serve as proof that he was right. After the night of the divorce envelope, Daniel left quickly and neatly, and that neatness was a wound all by itself. There was no suitcase toppling over, no door slammed, no neighbor peering through the curtains. He moved his things out on a Saturday morning while Emily was at piano class, and Laura was working extra hours at the accounting office. Emily remembered that lesson because she kept playing the middle of Für Elise wrong, her fingers stiff on the keys, and the teacher asked whether something was wrong. Emily said no, because in the Carter house, saying no was slowly becoming the only way to keep everything from falling. When she came home, Daniel's side of the closet was half empty, the hangers still swaying faintly as if clothes had only just been removed. His toothbrush was gone from the bathroom cup. His nightstand drawer held only a few old receipts, a dead pen, a watch battery, and a bent paper clip. The world's okayest dad mug sat in the sink, a dried ring of coffee staining the inside. He had not taken it. At that moment, Emily hated him for leaving it behind, then hated herself because afterward she washed the mug clean and placed it on the highest shelf like a relic of someone who had not died. In the first few weeks, Daniel called more often, but the calls sounded more like crisis image management updates than a father missing his child. He asked whether Emily had eaten, how school was, whether she was helping her mother, then usually said, I know this is hard, but I hope you won't let sadness turn into bitterness. I just want peace for everyone. Peace for everyone meant Emily was not allowed to ask questions that made him uncomfortable. It meant Laura was not allowed to tell the truth in a way that made him look bad. It meant relatives heard his version, the one where he had tried, before they heard the 2 people left behind breathe. Daniel did not disappear from the community. He still went to church, still attended fundraisers, still helped an old neighbor fix a fence, still answered Corinne's messages, still appeared at family gatherings as a slightly sad but decent man. He told friends he did not want to speak badly of Laura, but the marriage had been dead for a long time. He told Corinne he was afraid Emily had been placed in the middle, even though he was the one speaking to every adult in her life, shaping her into the distant child influenced by her mother. He told the pastor he had prayed deeply before deciding that he was not proud, but no one was born to live in a house without grace. Those sentences spread slowly, gently like smoke. No one came to the Carter house and asked Laura what had happened with a question wide enough for the truth to enter. They only called to say they were praying for her. Prayer can be kindness, but in Laura's case, it often sounded like a verdict edged in lace. Only a few months later, the first photo appeared on the Facebook page of a relative. Daniel stood in a brighter living room than the old one, beside Marion and her 2 children, Sophie and Ben. Sophie was Emily's age, with dark blonde hair, wearing a blue dress, seated at a piano after a small recital, while Daniel stood behind her, his hand resting on her shoulder, his smile so tender that Emily looked at the photo and felt as though she had been slapped with something soft. Marion's caption read, "Grateful for peace, laughter, and second chances." Emily stared at the photo on the old computer in her bedroom, the screen faintly blue, while behind her still hung the picture of her at 8 years old sitting on Daniel's shoulders at Cannon Beach, both of them laughing so hard their eyes had crinkled in the watch. Andy, her father had not vanished from the world. He had only moved into another frame, where he smiled better, stood straighter, placed his hand on another girl's shoulder, as though he had never left his own daughter waiting under a school awning in the rain. Laura saw the photo because Emily forgot to close the screen. She stood behind Emily's chair in silence long enough for Emily to know she had read the caption too. Emily turned, waiting for something, a curse, a confession, a piece of truth. Laura only placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "Turn it off, sweetheart. Things like that aren't good for the heart." Emily shrugged her mother's hand away. "Aren't you angry?" Laura looked at her with exhausted eyes. "I'm angry." "Then why don't you say anything?" Laura looked at the screen again, at Daniel in the living room light of someone else's home. "Because if I start speaking, I'm afraid you'll have to grow up inside that voice of mine." Emily did not understand. To her, Laura's silence did not feel protective. It felt like a dark room where all of Emily's questions grew mold. If no one said what Daniel had done, then maybe what he had said was true. Maybe Laura was cold. Maybe the old house was heavy. Maybe Emily really was distant. Maybe Sophie played piano beautifully, smiled brighter, knew how to make Daniel feel needed. A child who is not given the truth will often create an accusation to fill the empty space. And that accusation rarely points toward the person with the most power. It points toward the child herself. Daniel's Sunday calls became a ritual that deepened the wound week by week. He called at 7 in the evening, after dinner with his new family. Emily often knew what he had just eaten because, in the background, she could still hear Marion clearing plates or Ben calling to him from the living room. "Let me call Emily first," Daniel would say, loudly enough for that house to hear that he was fulfilling his duty. He asked about her grades, school, whether she still drew, and then the conversation would quickly slide towards Sophie winning a piano competition, Ben scoring a goal at soccer, Marion finding a wonderful lasagna recipe, their weekend at the coast even though it had rained. He did not tell these things with obvious cruelty. That was why Emily did not know whether she was allowed to hurt. Was a father talking about his new life hurting his daughter? Or was he merely sharing? Once she asked if he could come watch her school speech competition, because she had practiced for nearly 2 months, a speech about how history is written by the victors, and she thought maybe if Daniel heard her stand on a stage and talk about truth and perspective, he would remember that she had a voice too. Daniel paused, then sighed. "That weekend, I promised to take Ben to the coast with everyone. He's been having a hard time adjusting, Em. I need to keep my word to him. You understand. I'm trying to rebuild stability here." Here. That word cut deeply. Emily wanted to ask what about my stability, but she was afraid that if she asked, he would say she was making him uncomfortable. So she said, "Okay." He ended with "I love you," and she answered, "I love you too," because if she did not, she would become the cold child in his story. Those declarations of love felt like postcards from a place she was not allowed to stay overnight. The words were for Emily, but the time, the presence, the public photographs, the recitals and soccer games were given to the place he called his second chance. At 13, during a family barbecue at Aunt Corinne's house, Emily heard 2 adults murmuring beside the lemonade table that Laura must have been too difficult if Daniel had left, that Emily was too attached to her mother, and that was why she was distant from her father, that poor Daniel deserved to feel needed too. Someone else said Daniel looked lighter now that he was with Marion. Maybe everyone deserved to live honestly after years of suffering. Emily stood near the cookie tray, holding a paper plate, feeling her face grow hot even though the day was not warm. Corinne later drew her beneath the maple tree, placed a hand on her shoulder and said very gently, "You should call your father more. He's hurting, even if he doesn't say it. Men need to feel needed too." Emily was 13. She could not drive, could not file taxes, was not allowed to watch adult movies, but she had been given the responsibility of making a 40-year-old man feel needed. She nodded because that was what she had learned. When adults said something unfair in a gentle voice, children often mistook it for morality. That night she did not tell Laura. She was afraid it would hurt her mother. She was afraid her mother would go silent. She was also afraid that if she told it, Corinne's words would become more real. From then on, Emily began calling Daniel first on some Sundays, sometimes only to prove she was not distant. If he did not answer, she left a short, cheerful voicemail. "Hi, Dad, I was just calling to see how you were." It's nothing, it's nothing." She used that sentence so often it became a small room she locked herself inside. It was nothing when he missed the competition, nothing when he sent a birthday card late, nothing when Sophie posted a photo of Daniel taking her shopping for a dance dress, while Emily bought hers with Laura, both of them standing in a fitting room beneath white lights. Laura asking whether the blue dress was all right, and Emily nodding with a stone in her throat. Its nothing was how she cut her feelings into pieces small enough to swallow, so no one would have to say she was hard to love. From then on, Emily began trying to become an easy daughter to love with the seriousness of someone learning an instrument. No one said it outright, but she understood the rules. When Daniel called, she did not ask questions that made him sigh. When she visited his new house, she brought a gift for Marion, smiled at Sophie, played board games with Ben, washed dishes after dinner like a polite guest. At first, Marion treated Emily with a kind of courtesy mixed with wariness, the wariness of a woman who had heard too much about the distant daughter influenced by her mother. So when Emily behaved well, Marion seemed both relieved and suspicious. Sophie was not cruel. She was Emily's age, a little awkward, fond of piano, pretty dresses, and being driven by Daniel to recitals. Sophie's lack of cruelty was what hurt Emily more. If Sophie had been mean, Emily could have hated her. But Sophie was only another child, also needing a father she did not have, except she was the one receiving him. Ben was younger, sweet, attached to Daniel in a way that made Daniel expand. "Danny, look at this," he would call, and Daniel would immediately turn. Emily had once called Dad from the bottom of the stairs in the old house and heard him say, "In a minute." And that minute had stretched all the way to now. Once, after dinner, Daniel saw Emily wiping the table and loading plates neatly into the dishwasher. He placed a hand on her shoulder, proud as though he had discovered she was no longer a burden. "You've grown up so much, Em. I'm proud to see you trying." That sentence became a reward. Grown up meant not asking why he missed the competition. Grown up meant smiling in the new house. Grown up meant not making him feel guilty. She began to understand love as something given when she made herself small, light, easy to place in any room without bumping against the furniture. One fall weekend, Daniel invited her to stay overnight. Emily prepared too carefully, folding clothes into her duffel bag, packing books, a toothbrush, her nicest pajamas, and a small stuffed animal that she removed at the last minute because she was afraid Sophie would see it and think she was childish. Daniel and Marion's house was brighter than the old one and smelled of waffles and lavender detergent. Along the staircase hung family photos. Daniel and Marion at the beach, Daniel teaching Ben to fish, Daniel standing behind Sophie at her middle school graduation, all four of them in Hawaii, tanned, with flower leis around their necks. Emily walked slowly past the frames, searching for herself the way someone searches for her name on a list where it has been left off. There was no photo of her, not one birthday picture, not one childhood snapshot, not even an old family photo kept out of politeness. That staircase told a story in which Daniel began being a father when he stepped into Marion's house. The room set aside for Emily was a temporary office, with a computer desk, filing shelves, a printer, and a pull-out sofa. Marion took a blanket from a plastic bag in the closet and apologized that the house was a little cramped. Emily smiled and said it was fine. That night Sophie stopped by, looked at Emily's bag, and said without malice, "I thought Uncle Daniel only had us at this house." Sophie was not being cruel. She was only repeating the emotional architecture of the house. Emily said it was fine, because she had said that so many times it had become her second language. That night she lay on the pull-out sofa, the blanket smelling like new plastic, listening to Daniel, Marion, Sophie, and Ben laughing downstairs. On the wall of the office hung Daniel's calendar and Marion's certificates. Nothing proved Emily existed except the duffel bag on the floor. Near midnight, she heard Daniel pass through the hallway and stop outside the office door. Her heart beat faster. She thought he would open the door, ask if she was okay, realized this was not a daughter's room. But he only stood there for a few seconds, then walked on. The next morning he made pancakes for the house, asked Sophie if she had slept well because she had rehearsal, reminded Ben to bring a jacket, then turned to Emily last. "You sleep okay?" She said yes. He smiled, satisfied, as though she had passed a test. An easy daughter to love did not need a room of her own. Emily's teenage years passed in the exhausting effort not to resemble what Daniel had implied she was. She joined the debate club, but after every time she spoke too sharply, she apologized. She wrote essays so good her teacher encouraged her to study editing. But in life, she was always afraid of correcting someone's words too forcefully. She learned to read adults' faces, learned to recognize a sigh before it became blame, learned to change the subject when Laura stared too long at a bill, learned to tell Daniel she understood even when she understood nothing except that she had been placed outside. At school, people thought she was quiet, mature, agreeable. She did not tell the story of her house, not because there was no story, but because Daniel had already told it first. When your story has been told by someone with a calmer voice, every time you speak afterward sounds like a defense. Laura remained silent, still working part-time as an accountant, taking extra tax season files, buying discounted groceries, keeping the house clean, paying bills on time, never speaking badly of Daniel. Some evenings Emily came home and found her mother asleep at the kitchen table beside a pile of paperwork, glasses slipping down her nose, the overhead light falling across her exhausted face. Emily would drape a coat over Laura's shoulders, then stand there for a moment, both loving her and resenting her. Loving her because she stayed, resenting her because she stayed and did not speak. When Emily asked why her mother did not tell Karen the truth, Laura answered that she did not want Emily dragged into it. When Emily asked what the truth was, Laura said one day she would understand more. Emily hated that sentence. One day you'll understand more did not help a child survive today. When Emily was 17, Daniel canceled her birthday dinner because Ben was sick before an important baseball game. He sent a long, kind text saying he knew she was disappointed, but Ben needed him, and he hoped she understood how an adult's heart could be pulled in many directions. Laura had made pasta, bought a small cake, and lit candles on the table. The cake had white frosting and a few strawberries, not as beautiful as a cake from a bigger bakery, but Laura had bought the kind Emily liked. Emily read the message and let out a dry laugh. Ben needs Dad. I guess I don't. Laura set down a plate and said she was allowed to be angry. That sentence should have been gentle, but it made the anger in Emily flare up like a flame finding dry curtains. Allowed to be angry for what? You're never angry. You just stay quiet. You let Dad tell his story to everyone. You let them think you're cold. You let them think I'm distant. You left me to guess. Maybe Dad left because you never say anything. The moment the words left her mouth, Emily saw Laura's face change. Not dramatically, just as though something inside her had finally been set down. Laura looked at her daughter for a long time and said, "You think I didn't fight?" Emily wanted to take it back, but 17 is cruel because it knows it has hurt someone and still does not know how to stop. "I don't know," she said, her voice shaking with anger and fear. "You never told me anything." Laura stood very still. "I gave you a house where you didn't have to hear me curse your father every night. Then, in exchange, I got a house full of questions." The sentence was more brutal than Emily meant it to be. Laura did not argue anymore. She turned back into the kitchen, turned off the stove, and put the birthday cake in the refrigerator. That night, Emily heard her mother crying in the bathroom, very softly, with the faucet running to cover the sound. And for the first time, she understood that Daniel's story had not only hurt her, it had placed a knife in her hand, and she had unconsciously used it to stab the only person who stayed. The next morning, a slice of birthday cake sat on the kitchen table wrapped in plastic, with a note from Laura beside it. "I'm sorry I didn't know how to make it hurt less." Emily held that note for a long time. She did not apologize right away. Some mistakes made by the wounded need time before they are brave enough to call themselves mistakes. The first piece of evidence appeared before Emily left for college, in an old cardboard box in Laura's closet. Mother and daughter were cleaning because Laura wanted to repaint the bedroom. A small task that, to Emily, felt like an attempt to change the color of a room that had held too much silence. The box fell from the top shelf, its lid flipping open, papers spilling across the floor. Receipts, bank letters, legal documents, a few printed emails, things Laura had kept but never used as weapons. Emily bent to gather them, and saw an email Daniel had sent to a lawyer nearly 3 months before the night of the envelope on the dining table. In it, he asked about division of property, visitation schedules, and the phrase that made her hands go cold. "If I move in with someone else." If I move in with someone else. 3 months earlier, before he said he had been pushed to his limit, before he said he had no choice, before Laura knew for certain, Emily flipped another page and found a hotel receipt from Beaverton, the date matching one of the evenings Daniel had said he was at a late meeting. Laura had written a note in the margin. He said church meeting. Beneath it was the date Laura had called the church office and found out there had been no meeting that night. Another email Daniel sent Karen said, "I don't want everyone thinking I just gave up. But you know how Laura is. She'll make everything my fault." Emily's chest tightened. Daniel had written about Laura's reaction before Laura ever had a chance to react. He had prepared the wall before pushing them into it. Laura walked in, saw the papers in Emily's hands, and for one instant her face lost its calm. "Give that to me," she said. Emily held on. "You knew." Laura did not answer right away. "You knew Dad planned it before. Emily, you don't need to carry this." I've been carrying it, Mom. Since I was 12, I just didn't know its name. Laura put a hand on the closet frame as if she needed to steady herself. I didn't want you to read these things and hate your father. Emily laughed, but the sound was like paper tearing. You think I don't hate anyone because I don't have evidence? No, Mom. I hate myself. That made Laura tremble. She sat on the edge of the bed. The bed Daniel had slept in for years before calling the house a place where he was dying slowly. I was wrong, she said very softly. I thought silence was how I kept you from poison. I didn't know silence could be poison too. That evidence was not enough to break the entire narrative, but it was enough for Emily to know her memory was not crazy. Daniel had not been driven from the house in despair. He had gone first, prepared the road, then returned to the dinner table to tell his daughter he needed to breathe. That night, Emily went upstairs, opened her old inbox, and searched for emails Daniel had sent her. I love you. I hope you understand. I don't want to make this hard for you. I'm trying to rebuild. Placed beside the lawyer's email, those sentences changed meaning. She began to understand the thing she would pursue for the rest of her life. A sentence does not only speak through its words, it speaks through what has been left out. College took Emily away from the old house, but it did not take her out of Daniel's story. She studied literature and editing in Eugene, choosing the field partly because she loved books, partly because she was obsessed with how moving a comma could turn a victim into a cause. In literature classes, she was good at identifying unreliable narrators. Friends laughed because she could debate for 20 minutes about how a character had deceived himself, with only 3 descriptions of a room. No one knew she was not arguing with the character. She was arguing with Daniel. She wrote an essay about the gaps in family memory and received a high grade with her professor writing in the margin. Sharp, emotionally restrained. Emily stared at that note for a long time. She had been praised for keeping emotion from spilling onto the page, just as Daniel had once praised her for being grown up when she washed dishes in his new house. She fell in love with Noah in her sophomore year. Noah was gentle, quiet, studying biology, the kind of person who brought her tea when she stayed up late reading manuscripts. Because he was not like Daniel, she panicked even more when he needed space. If Noah took too long to answer a message, she reread the conversation, searching for fault in her tone. If he said he needed an evening alone to study, she apologized for bothering him, though he had never said she had. If he sighed from exhaustion, she immediately asked whether she had done something wrong. She tried to become a girlfriend who did not ask too much, did not apply pressure, did not make anyone feel suffocated. One night, after she sent 3 apology messages simply because he had not replied for 2 hours, Noah came to her dorm. He sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded between his knees, and looked at her helplessly. You're always afraid of being left, Emily. I don't know what to do with that fear. She reacted sharply, said he did not understand, said she did not need pity, said if he wanted to leave, he should just leave, and then immediately saw herself as a 12-year-old girl pulling away from Daniel's hand at the dinner table. Noah did not leave right away. He stayed for a few more months, but they both knew there was a third person in that relationship. A man named Daniel who was not present but still sat between them, inspecting every sentence, every silence. Maya Reynolds, her college best friend, blunt enough to hurt Emily sometimes, sat with her on the dorm steps after she and Noah broke up. Maya listened to everything, did not say Noah was terrible, did not say you deserve better. She only said, you're dating the present but reacting to your father. Emily hated that sentence at first. Don't turn everything into trauma, she said. Maya shrugged. I'm not turning it into anything. He did that a long time ago. I'm just naming it. That sentence followed her for years. Daniel was no longer there, but his narrative still controlled how she loved. She was always trying to prove she was not cold, not hard to reach, not the reason someone would leave. The harder she tried, the more she allowed a man who had left long ago to keep his hand on her throat. Daniel missed Emily's college graduation because Ben had a state baseball championship. He called 2 days before, regretful, saying he had tried to rearrange things, but Ben was in an important game. Marion could not handle the logistics alone, and even though he knew Emily would understand, he still felt terrible. I'll send flowers, he said. I'm proud of you, Em. You know that, she said okay. On graduation day, Laura sat in the stands wearing an old navy dress ironed perfectly flat, holding a camera, crying when Emily's name was called. Karen sent a congratulatory text with a flower emoji. Daniel sent flowers to the dorm with a card. Proud of you always. On Facebook that same day, Marion posted a photo of Daniel standing beside Ben in his baseball uniform, sunlight on his face, and Daniel shared it with the caption, "Wouldn't miss this for the world." Emily looked at the bouquet on the table, then at the post on her knee. She understood the true message, more clearly than any spoken words. Daniel could avoid missing important thing. It was only that the important thing was not her. If she reacted, he would say she was selfish, that he could not be in two places at once, that he loved her but life was complicated. So she did not react. She put the flowers in a vase, sent a thank you text, then went into the dorm bathroom and cried alone, turning on the faucet so her roommate would not hear. Later, when she became an editor, she would become obsessed with captions. A short sentence could cover so many small bodies. Second chances. Proud of you always. Wouldn't miss this for the world. Sometimes the most beautiful sentences were where people hid their cruelest choices. After college, Emily returned to Portland not because she wanted to be near everything again, but because she was hired by a small publishing house that specialized in local nonfiction and memoir. A job with modest pay, but one that placed her exactly where she could do the strangest work of her life. Editing other people's stories until Hay became more honest. The publishing office occupied an old brick building, the hallway smelling of paper, dust, and stale coffee, the windows looking out over a street where it often rained. Emily liked arriving early in the morning, turning on her desk lamp, opening a manuscript, lifting a red pen, and reading line by line like someone sweeping for mines. She disliked passages where the author made himself too clean a hero. She always asked, "Who else is missing from this room? Does the person you're mentioning get to speak? Is this sentence explaining or avoiding responsibility?" Her boss, a woman in her 50s named Joan, once told Emily she had a gift for hearing what had been left out of a paragraph. Emily smiled and called it professional instinct, but it was not. It was a life. Around that time, her relationship with Daniel became thin, polite, almost administrative. He sent birthday messages. She replied thank you. He invited her to Thanksgiving at Marion's house. She usually said she was busy, sometimes truthfully, sometimes because she did not have enough strength to stand inside a house whose staircase held no photos of her. Laura did not mention Daniel often, but between mother and daughter there was now a different kind of silence, less dark, though not completely warm. Some evenings Emily visited the old house, and they ate soup at the kitchen table while Rain tapped the door, and Laura told small stories about Daniel from before, not to excuse him, but to put the truth at its proper level of complexity. "Your father used to be funny," she said once. "He wasn't always like this." Emily looked at her mother. "That makes it harder," Laura nodded. "I know. A betrayer who once had goodness in him is a crueler loss. If Daniel had always been bad, the beautiful memories would be easier to erase. But he had taught Emily to ride a bike, made rabbit-shaped pancakes, sat in the living room listening to the first poem she wrote, told her she had a unique eye for the world. Those memories did not disappear when the truth surfaced. They only became sharper objects. Emily gradually understood that losing a father was not only losing his present. It was losing the right to trust the beautiful memories without being cut by them. Years later, Daniel's marriage to Marion began to crack, and it was that crack that opened a door Emily had not expected. Marion's first call came on a rainy afternoon when Emily was at the publishing office, surrounded by the smell of new paper and cold coffee, with the manuscript of a man writing about leaving a toxic marriage open on her screen, though he had not given his ex-wife a single line of dialogue. Emily saw Marion's name on her phone and thought it must be a mistake. Marion was not calling to apologize. Not yet. Her voice was tired, cautious, like someone entering a room she once believed she would never need to enter. "Emily, I know this is a strange call, but I wanted to ask, did Daniel ever tell your mother she was too sensitive?" Emily went silent. Outside the window, rain ran in thin lines down the glass. Marion inhaled very slowly. "He tells me I make this house tense, that he needs to breathe, that he's been trying for a long time. And when I hear those things," she stopped, "I suddenly feel like I've heard them before, just not with my own ears." Emily stood from her desk and walked into the back hallway near the photocopier and recycling bin. There was no sense of victory inside her, only a cold clarity. The pattern was repeating. Daniel had not left the old family because Laura was too cold, because Emily was too distant. He left any place that began asking him to be accountable, then built a story in which that place had suffocated him. Marion said he had started calling friends, saying she was controlling, that Sophie no longer respected him. that Ben had been influenced by his mother. The old sentences with new names. "I'm not saying I was perfect," Marion said, her voice hardening for a moment, as if she still needed to preserve some dignity. "I know I'm not always easy to live with. But he's writing you before you get to speak," Emily said. Marion was silent. In that silence, two women stood at opposite ends of the same story. One had been used as proof that the man had found peace. The other had believed herself to be that peace, until it was her turn to be called the suffocating house. Marion did not become an ally immediately. She still defended herself, still said Emily did not know everything about the past, still avoided the part where she had believed Daniel too easily. But that call placed a key fragment in Emily's hand. For the first time, the woman who had stood inside the replacement frame saw the man outside the frame holding the pen and writing the story in the same old way. After the call, Emily returned to her desk, looked at the manuscript on the screen, and for the first time in her life typed a comment with trembling hands. "The narrator may be omitting the cost paid by others." Aunt Karen was the next to unlock something, though she did it slowly and painfully. Karen had defended Daniel for years. She had once told Emily to call her father more, had once said Laura was difficult, had once believed her brother had suffered. But as Marion's marriage cracked, Karen began to feel a familiarity that frightened her. Emily did not know exactly what shifted Karen. Maybe it was an evening when Daniel called her and spoke of Marion in precisely the voice he once used for Laura. Maybe it was when Sophie, now grown, cried in Karen's kitchen and said, "I don't know why Uncle Daniel acts like everything is Mom's fault." Maybe it was age, when the stories people used to survive begin to lose their glue. One evening, Karen emailed Emily with the subject line, "You should have these." There was no long opening. Attached was a chain of emails Daniel had sent Karen before the divorce. Emily opened them one by one in her small Portland apartment, her hands so cold she had to set down her tea. Daniel had written weeks before the night of the envelope, "I need people to understand how long I've endured. Laura will turn this into me betraying her, but the truth is the marriage has been dead for years." Another email read, "If Laura reacts strongly, it will only prove what I've been saying. I'm afraid Emily will be pulled into her mother's bitterness." Another, "Marion reminds me what peace feels like. I don't want to be punished just because I found a place where I don't feel wrong for existing." Emily read the sentence, "If Laura reacts strongly, it will only prove what I've been saying," again and again. Daniel had not only told the story after he left, he had prepared a way to turn Laura's pain into evidence against her. He had predicted the reaction of the wounded person, then built the frame that would call that reaction the reason he had to go. This was no longer weakness, no longer a tired man lost on the way. This was method. Karen called afterward, crying. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know." Emily sat on the living room floor, her laptop open in front of her. "You didn't know because you didn't ask my mother," she said, not shouting, but cold enough that Karen fell quiet. "You asked Dad," Karen cried harder. "He was my brother. My mother was the one left behind. I thought I was helping the family." Emily looked at the emails on the screen. "No, you were helping Dad's story have an audience." That sentence was cruel. She knew it, but sometimes truth must be sharp enough to cut through the soft fabric of apologies that arrived too late. Karen did not argue. Maybe that was the first time Emily saw an adult from the old system not try to put her own pain before Emily. After the call, Emily printed every email, not yet knowing what she would do with them, only knowing she did not want them to exist merely as files that could be deleted. She placed them in a gray folder and wrote one word on the outside, "Sequence." Not dad, not divorce, not proof, just sequence. Because Daniel had lived by scrambling time, placing reaction before cause, placing his pain before his action. The only way to resist him was to put everything back in the right order. Laura became mildly ill in the winter when Emily was 28. A bout of pneumonia that kept her home from work for several weeks. Emily returned to the old house to care for her mother, sleeping in her childhood bedroom, where the walls had been painted a different color, but morning light still fell into the same corner. The house looked smaller through adult eyes, but heavier too, like an aging body that had held too many rainy seasons in its wood. The world's okayest dad mug was still on the high shelf behind a few other cups. Emily had meant to throw it away many times, and Laura had never used it, but neither had done it. Some objects exist not because anyone wants to keep them, but because no one has found the right ritual for letting them go. One rainy night, while Emily made ginger tea in the kitchen, Laura called her over and handed her a small brown note. "I think you should read this," she said. It was not a dramatic diary. Not long passages of rage, only dry notes by date. The day Daniel came home late. The day Laura found the hotel receipt. The day Daniel said he needed space. The day Laura suggested marriage counseling. The day Daniel refused and said therapy would only make everything more toxic. The day Laura called the law office and learned Daniel had already booked a consultation. The day Karen called and said Daniel was hurting and Laura should look at herself. The day Daniel told relatives Laura did not want to save the marriage, even though he was the one who had refused therapy. There were also small lines about Emily. Em stood in the hallway while we argued. Daniel looked at her when he said he didn't mean to. She nodded. I hate myself for not pulling her out of that. Emily asked if Dad loved her, why did he leave? I couldn't answer. I was afraid if I told the truth, I would make her lose her father. I didn't understand she had already lost him. Emily read in the old kitchen with the smell of ginger tea, damp rain outside the porch, the heater humming steadily. Laura sat across from her, smaller in a gray sweater, her hands thinner after the illness. Why didn't you show me this sooner? Emily asked, but her voice was not angry the way it had been at 17. It was only tired. Laura looked down at her hands. Because you were 12, then 13, then 17. I kept thinking if I spoke, I would put hatred inside you. I didn't want your father to take that from you too. But he took it another way. I know. You let me think maybe I was the reason. Laura closed her eyes, a tear falling onto the back of her hand. I know, no defense, no attempt to save herself, only I know. And that refusal to save herself was so different from Daniel that it hurt Emily. Daniel always needed a story to live with himself. Laura was willing to sit inside an ugly sentence if it was true. Emily cried, not explosively. Tears slipped down in silence. I said terrible things to you. Laura reached across the table and placed a hand over hers. You were a child left in a room where no one turned on the light. I have blame in that darkness too. Emily shook her head, but Laura squeezed her hand. No, let me have my part. Your father took too much by turning everything into someone else's fault. I don't want to do the opposite and call myself a saint. That made Emily cry harder. This was what Daniel had never done. Take his part without using it to ask to be forgiven immediately. That night, mother and daughter sat in the kitchen until nearly 2 in the morning, not solving childhood, not healing through one conversation. But for the first time, the truth did not stand outside the door. Laura spoke of the days she wanted to call Karen and scream, but looked at Emily doing homework at the table, and told herself she could not make her child a battlefield. Emily spoke of the office sofa at Daniel's house, Sophie's sentence, the wouldn't miss this for the world caption. Laura cried when she heard that, not because she was surprised, but because she was finally seeing one of her daughter's wounds without trying to bandage it too quickly. Before going to bed, Emily took the world's okayest dad mug down from the shelf. Laura looked at her. Do you want to throw it away? Emily held the mug, her thumb passing over the faded letters. Not yet, she said. I want it in the folder. Laura did not understand right away, but nodded. The next day, Emily placed the mug in a box with the printed emails, a copy of the journal, screenshots of captions, and hotel receipts. Not to sue, not for revenge, so memory would no longer be fogged. Daniel returned when he was in his 60s. After his marriage to Marion had collapsed, and his relationships with Sophie and Ben had cooled in a painfully ordinary way. Sophie moved to Seattle, built a life of her own, posted fewer photos with him. Ben married, called Daniel when something needed fixing, or when he felt guilty for going too long without calling. Marion no longer held the frame for him to stand in. Daniel sent Emily an email with the subject line, "Can we talk?" He wrote that he had been thinking a lot, that age makes people look back, that he wanted to repair things, wanted his daughter back. The words were softer than they had once been, but they still slid around responsibility like water around stone. I was trapped in a difficult situation. I was hurting too. I think your mother made you more distant from me than I realized at the time. Emily read the email in her Portland apartment, where she lived alone, with shelves full of manuscripts, a small plant on the sill, and photographs she had chosen to hang for no one else. She recognized the pattern was still there. Daniel wanted forgiveness, without naming exactly what he had done. He wanted to return as the aging, regretful father, but he still carried the old pen, ready to revise the story if he could. Maya, now her friend of many years, read the email when Emily handed her the phone in a cafe. Maya frowned. He doesn't ask what you need. Emily looked out the window, where rain fell on cars parked along the curb. He says he wants his daughter back. Right, that's what he needs. Emily smiled faintly without humor. Do you think I should meet him? Maya did not answer immediately. Do you want to meet him so he finally understands, or so you can stop waiting for him to understand? That question stayed. Emily agreed to meet Daniel, but not over private coffee, where he could use a soft voice and red eyes to pull her back into his private room of narrative. She suggested they meet at Aunt Corinne's house, with Laura, Corinne, Marion, and Sophie present, not for revenge, but so no one could keep saying everyone remembered it differently. Daniel hesitated. I don't want this to turn into a trial, he said over the phone. Emily stood in her apartment kitchen, looking at the cardboard box with the old mug on the table. Neither do I. A trial has a judge. This is just a room with the people your story touched. He was silent. Emily, I'm afraid you're coming into this with a lot of anger. I'm coming with sequence. He did not understand or did not want to. The meeting took place on a gray Sunday afternoon, rain falling just hard enough to blur Corinne's windows. Corinne still spread a white tablecloth, set glasses of water with ice melting slowly inside, and made roast chicken as though food could soften the edges of a confrontation. Laura arrived in a black coat, her face calm but her hand gripping her bag a little too tightly. Marion came alone, her hair cut shorter than before, her face tired but clear. Sophie arrived after her, now a grown woman in a cream sweater, with the eyes of someone unsure whether she had the right to be in the room. Daniel arrived last, wearing a brown coat, his hair much grayer, his shoulders slightly stooped, but his voice still beautiful, still calm. He hugged Corinne, nodded to Marion, greeted Laura with too much courtesy, then looked longer at Emily. You look like your mother, he said. Years earlier, that would have frightened her because in Daniel's mouth, being like Laura had meant cold, difficult, distant. Now Emily answered, thank you. Daniel paused faintly, then smiled sadly. They sat around the table. The ice in the glasses melted slowly. No one touched the chicken. Daniel began with the familiar sentence. I just hope everyone understands I didn't feel I had a choice then. Emily looked at him, then opened the folder in front of her. She was not shaking the way she had thought she would. Onto the table she placed the timeline. The lawyer's email before the night of the envelope, hotel receipts, emails to Corinne, Laura's journal. The second chances, post, photos of Daniel showing up for Sophie and Ben at milestones he had missed for Emily. The recent email where he still said her mother had made her distant. She did not shout. She spoke very slowly. You had choices. You chose to leave. You chose to meet with a lawyer before telling Mom. You chose to tell Aunt Corinne that if Mom reacted strongly, it would prove you right. You chose to call this house a place where you were dying while still letting me sit at the dinner table. And here you say it wasn't my fault. You chose to stand behind Sophie in the piano photo, chose to go watch Ben play baseball, chose to write wouldn't miss this for the world on the day I graduate. You didn't just leave this family. You made us carry the guilt so your choice could look clean. Daniel went pale. Corinne cried, her hand trembling on her napkin. Marion looked down at the table, both hands clasped together. Sophie looked at the old photo on the table, where Daniel stood behind her at the piano. Her face changed very slowly, maybe for the first time. She understood that a photo that once made her happy could also be evidence that had hurt someone else. Daniel tried to recover his voice. Emily, you're gathering separate pieces to create a very cruel story. I learned from you. That sentence drained the air from the room. Daniel looked at her, his eyes reddening, whether from pain or from the loss of control she could not tell. I was hurting, he said. I truly was. My marriage to your mother. Laura lifted her head. Don't, she said. One very small word, but the strongest word Emily had ever heard her mother say to him. Daniel looked at Laura as though betrayed, because she had dared to enter her own story. I wasn't trying to blame. Marion gave a very quiet, painful laugh. You always say that before you blame. Sophie looked at her mother. Corinne covered her mouth. Daniel looked around and realized the room no longer stood in the old order. Corinne was no longer the listener who gave him automatic sympathy. Marion was no longer proof that he had found peace. Sophie was no longer the child inside the frame. Laura was no longer silent for fear of poisoning her daughter. Emily was no longer the child waiting to be praised for being grown up. He finally said, I'm sorry, but even his apology circled his own pain. I didn't know what else to do. I was only human. I was afraid. I felt like if I stayed, I would become bitter. Emily looked at him and understood that maybe he regretted the consequences, but not necessarily the method. You didn't lose this family, she said. You chose to leave it, then made us carry the guilt for that choice. Daniel lowered his head. For the first time, he had no beautiful answer. But that silence did not heal. It only confirmed what Emily already knew. Truth could stand up in the middle of the table, but it could not hug the 12-year-old girl. It could not return to the rainy night and remove the envelope from the table. It only made it impossible for the adults to keep pretending the envelope had appeared there by itself. After that meeting, nothing became clean. Corinne sent Laura a handwritten apology, then called Emily a few times, each time trying not to justify herself but sometimes slipping into, "I don't know how to believe my brother could," until Emily had to say, "You don't need to tell me how hard it is for you to believe anymore." Marian and Laura met once at a cafe, a meeting no one knew what to call. Not friendship, not reconciliation, just two women who had been placed at opposite ends of Daniel's story, sitting at the same table, speaking about the same sentences he had used, about what it felt like to be called tense when they were only in pain. Sophie sent Emily a long message, apologizing for what she had said years ago in the office room, though Emily had never told her how much it hurt. "I didn't know," Sophie wrote. "I really didn't know." Emily stared at the message for a long time before replying, "I know." She did not add, "It's okay," because "it's okay" is the cheapest lie wounded people often use to make others feel lighter. Daniel sent a handwritten letter after that, his handwriting shakier than it had once been. He said he remembered Emily as a little girl, remembered Cannon Beach, remembered the world's okayest dad mug, remembered her reading a poem in the living room. He said he had been wrong, but between those sentences there were still places where he slid. "I wish your mother and I could have been kinder to each other back then. I wish you hadn't had to hear adult things. I hope you understand I never meant to hurt you." Emily read it and felt an old sadness. Daniel still wanted to be judged by his intentions, while her life had been shaped by his actions. She did not answer immediately. She placed the letter in the box with the other evidence, not because it was evidence against him exactly, but because it was part of the sequence too. Even his apology did not know how to stand still inside his fault. Laura gradually recovered. Emily returned to her apartment, returned to work, returned to manuscripts. But she did not return unchanged. Some days she felt lighter, then hated that even lightness had come too late. Some evenings she would read a sentence in a manuscript and suddenly find herself 12 again, sitting before the white envelope. Sometimes men in her life sighed, and she had to remind herself, not every sigh is Daniel, but not every sigh requires her to shrink herself to keep someone from leaving. She learned slowly, learned not to apologize before knowing she was wrong, learned to say, "I need time to think," instead of "it's fine." Learned to love Laura not as a saint, but as a woman who had tried to protect her child and had also let her child wander in the dark. Learned to remember that Daniel had once been good, without letting that goodness erase what he had done. Real maturity did not make her softer in the old way. It made her more precise, and that precision was sometimes so cold, she missed the version of herself who could foolishly believe the sentence, "I love you," without checking what actions stood beside. A year later, Daniel came to Emily's apartment in Portland with a box of old photographs in his hands. He did not give much warning, only texted that he had a few things to bring over, and Emily, after a very long pause, agreed to meet him at the door. The day was cold, the sky pale gray, the apartment hallway smelling of old carpet and floor cleaner. Daniel stood at her door, older than he had been at Corinne's house, shoulders more bent, holding the photo box like a man carrying evidence that the past had once contained beautiful moments. Emily looked at the box. She knew it might hold photos of herself on his shoulders at Cannon Beach, photos of her missing her front teeth, photos of him teaching her to ride a bike, photos of the three of them in front of a Christmas tree, objects real enough to make any sentence like, "I loved you," hard to dismiss completely. Daniel said he had found them while clearing things out. Marian had sold their old house after the separation. Sophie did not want to keep much. Ben took a few fishing rods, and the old photos of Emily, strangely, had been sitting in a box in the garage. "I thought you should have them," he said. Emily recognized that part of him wanted that gift to become a key. Not out of deliberate cruelty. Maybe he really did feel old, lonely, afraid to die without anyone calling him dad in the old way. That was what made the moment hurt more. Daniel was no longer the 40-year-old man, sitting straight before the white envelope. He was older now, losing the audience for his story, returning with a box of photos and a soft voice. "I want to start again," he said. "Not like before. I know it can't be like before. But, Sunday dinners, a phone call, seeing each other sometime. I want to be your father while there's still time." Emily looked at him, at the photo box, at the man who had once chosen to stand inside another family's frame, and had returned only when those frames no longer opened for him the way they used to. The fiercest part of her anger had already passed, leaving behind a cold clarity. "I spent so many years trying to stop waiting for you to step into my life," she said. "I can't reopen that place just because it feels empty to you now." Daniel looked at her, his eyes reddening. "So there's no room for me anymore?" That question could have destroyed her once. She had lived so long trying to prove she had a place, that she was worth keeping, that if she was easier, warmer, less wounded, her father would see. Now she only saw a very sad truth. "It's not that there's no room," she said. "It's that you left it for too long." He trembled slightly, the photo box now in her hands. "I don't know what to do with that." "I know," Emily said. "I lived with that feeling longer than you have." Daniel closed his eyes, and for 1 second she saw the father who once read to her, who made rabbit-shaped pancakes, who laughed when he received the world's okayest dad mug. She saw all of it and still did not open the door. That was the most brutal part of growing up. Not that love disappeared, but that love was no longer enough to betray herself. Daniel stood outside the door for another beat, as if waiting for her to change her mind, as if some part of him still believed the daughter who once sat by the Sunday phone would find a way to make this moment hurt less for him. Emily did not. She closed the door very gently, not as an act of revenge, but as a final boundary. In the quiet apartment, she set the photo box on the table and did not open it right away. Outside the window, Portland rain fell lightly, the same small rain that had covered the night of the white envelope on the dining table. The truth had come back to her, but it did not return her childhood. It did not place Daniel in the audience beneath the speech competition stage, did not bring him to graduation, did not erase the nights she slept on a sofa in the office of his new house, did not take back what she had said to Laura at 17. It only gave her back the right not to live inside the indictment he had written. Only that night did Emily open the box. The first photo was Cannon Beach, Emily at 8, sitting on Daniel's shoulders, her hair flying, her mouth open in a smile so wide her eyes were almost closed. She looked at that little girl for a long time. She did not tear the photo, did not burn it, did not put it on a shelf. She slipped it into a new envelope, along with a copy of the timeline, Daniel's letter, and a white sheet of paper where she wrote very slowly, "He was there. Then he chose not to be." That sentence did not make her lighter. It was simply true, and sometimes, after a life spent trapped inside someone else's story, truth is the only thing steady enough to stand on. Emily placed the envelope in a drawer, turned off the living room light, and let the rain keep tapping against the glass. She survived. Laura survived. Daniel survived too, in his own way, outside a door that did not open. But Emily was no longer the little girl waiting for her father to return with an explanation that would make everything hurt less. She had learned that some people come back not because they finally see you, but because the places they chose are no longer open. And this time, she had the right to close the door.